Alright, as August comes to an end and we're working our way into September, let's talk about three more movies. Actually, we're going to talk about six more movies, but the other three will be on the video right after this. But for now, we'll do these three, and I think we're going to start with Reminiscence, also known as Apparent Box Office Disaster, Reminiscence. Which, in many cases wouldn't really matter, but if it was maybe if it was a better movie, I'd be more inclined to not kick it while it's down. But let's do it. Let's just beat the fuck out of Reminiscence. Now, of course, you don't want to do anything that would discourage coming up with new ideas and new concepts and stuff like that. And of course, this one comes from Lisa Joy, who's like one of the showrunners for Westworld. So there's going to be like a heavy sort of sci-fi element to this, and it does have a concept that would probably work. This whole future where everything's been taken over by climate change, so there's like flooding and the heat is unbearable. Like it's literally there's just water in the streets at all times, and people have just come to live with this. And there's also certain futuristic technology, kind of like what Hugh Jackman and Tandy Newton do, which is they can put you in this tank of sorts, and then you can relive your memories by way of like some sort of projection type thing that they can see and you can see inside your mind, like you go right back there. And they can see what you do, so they can do things like find things you've misplaced or something bigger, something more important. So, and this is eventually going to turn into some sort of, it starts off trying to do like a noir thing, but then it also tries to do like an action thing, but then it also tries to do a romance thing. It's trying to do a lot of things, and none of them really particularly well, but they do have a concept, at least. So there's that, I guess. And I was kind of... once again, it's not necessarily always the case where, like, the opening shot will tell you what kind of movie you're in for. Because that could be jumping the gun. But when it starts and you realize this is some really big movie with, like, a really big cast that, in another era might have been some really big blockbuster, you would think that the effects, at least, would be top-notch, especially since you're in, like, when you're in the sci-fi genre. Like, that might want to be one of the first things that you're gonna do, right? If you're gonna set up, like, a whole new world of sorts. But, as soon as this, happened, I was talking about the flooding that's going on. It's very CGI-looking water, from the very start, and it's just a all-around very CGI-looking city. So if you want to like immerse the audience by building a whole new world, you might want to make sure they believe that it's an actual world that is actually there and not animated. But that's our opening shot. So that's so if you're like ready to go in and be like really invested in this new place, like be transported to another place or another future or something. If really bad CGI doesn't bother you, then you might possibly get there. I don't know, but so yeah, it starts to go for the whole noir feel thing. Like that's what it seems to be what it's trying to do at its core, at its heart. So you've got all of the noir cliches. You've got like the femme fatale of sorts with Rebecca Ferguson. You've got the way everything's lit. She's a singer in like this really old-fashioned looking club. And the two of them have a very instant and mysterious attraction. They're hitting all the beats that they've seen in other movies, but what they're doing with them isn't really here. To the point that once their romance does start, there's just kind of a sudden cut to the conflict that has come of this, and Hugh Jackman just kind of says in passing, this went on for months. It's like, oh, that's gonna get me attracted to this love story. That's gonna keep me involved with this love story. It's like, oh, so yeah, this one scene you're seeing happened for like a month. Are you invested yet? So once again, it does like the most minimal effort tries to get you as involved as possible. And because it really wants to immerse you in this, but it doesn't want to seem to do any like elaborate on anything. It wants to stop at its ideas, like most of these high concept movies do, unfortunately. Um, and that's the thing too, is it's like when you have this noir setup, or what it's trying to do anyway, and the like femme fatale comes in, that's supposed to be when, like, you know, the movie's gonna like take off. And it's gonna be like, oh, this is gonna be like the establishing point of wherever this story's going, or it's gonna add, you know, the real key mystery element to it. And the idea will be like, you know, really trying to figure her out is going to be a big part of this mystery, and how they relate to each other, and the steaminess that their relationship brings. Um, but the problem with that is, because you know already the directions they're going, because they're clearly trying to do a noir thing, as soon as Rebecca Ferguson walks in and you get a sense immediately of the kind of character she's going to be, it's pretty much the exact opposite reaction you might have. It's the, oh, well, you're basically just dreading predictability. You're like, well, I know where this is going to be. It's going to be like, we're going to be questioning the whole movie. Is she good or is she bad? And, you know, where does she come from? Is she working for somebody? And if so, who? What is her actual objective? Because she comes in saying, hey, you know, she comes in after closing. She's like, oh, guys, don't close down yet. I lost my keys. I need to get in the memory thing so I can see where my keys went. And, and that's the thing that's gonna draw us in and draws her into this story, is she supposedly lost her fucking keys. So as you can see, as far as getting to this riveting point where the movie's just gonna take off and we're gonna be ready for the ride, you kind of keep waiting for it, and it just kind of doesn't come. I mean, they try, and once they try to go into the crime aspect, there's a lot going on. You've got this whole subplot with like this billionaire or something that's Brett Cullen and his family, and he's got a whole thing going on of like a potential corruption thing or something like that. And then you've got Cliff Curtis over here, who is a corrupt cop, and Cliff Curtis works for this big criminal named Saint Joe, I believe. And there's all of these things that they introduce. It's like, and you kind of just like, I'm guessing eventually these things will come together, but it's just, I just don't I don't care about them as individual storylines, so I'm not really sure how I'm going to care by the time they may or may not converge. I don't know. And that's what a lot of the movie is. It's just watching all these plot threads just kind of flounder by themselves, while it keeps trying to bring in this love story also, this obsession that he has. And we know, we saw like The Prestige and stuff like that. We know how well Hugh Jackman can play obsessive and like needing this, and will go to the deepest, darkest parts of his mind, to get to those points, to get what he wants, and what he really, really desires. And this whole thing is just so flat and dead, kind of immediately, and a lot of it I think comes from the fact that he narrates it. Once again, something else we get quite a bit of in The Prestige, if you want one example, of how well Hugh Jackman can do this kind of thing, the things that this movie is asking of him. And this narration is basically like, you know how there's an option where like for the hearing impaired they have subtitles, and then for like the vision impaired they have the audio that explains what's going on the screen. Hugh Jackman's narration is basically just that audio. Once again, I know that narration is the whole, oh, we're trying to do a noir thing kind of thing, but that's not really how that narration's supposed to work. It's not supposed to just literally describe the actions that are happening, or just say what we're thinking as an audience. Like, instead of feeling like we're getting inside Hugh Jackman's head and kind of seeing, like, you know, what it is that he really wants and how he might get there, but in like this sort of really interesting way that opens up new doors to the character, and maybe might show us things about him that we haven't seen yet or we haven't figured out yet. It's just him explaining. It's just him saying out loud what we're already thinking, like, you know, who was she? You know, what was she hiding? And it's like, I had to do this. I had to go to New Orleans. It's like, we can't just watch him go to New Orleans. He has to tell us that he's going. As he's going, like, we're watching him like on the train, and he's and that's all he's doing. He's just explaining what he's doing, or he's asking questions that we're. I don't even know as an audience if we're even asking those questions because we'd have to care before we did that. So it's maybe the movie was smart enough to anticipate. Oh, we've probably long since lost the audience by this point. We better just go ahead and do their job for them. So it seems like somebody's watching this, even if it's the character that's in it. So there's that. But eventually, once again, we do get to it trying to be an action movie. So we get a lot of really forced action scenes. We get like really forced slow-mo that's supposed to look like badass or something like that. There's the misplaced song cliche where a fight breaks out to Tainted Love, I think it was. For a second, but it's still there. And what's really funny is they get to a point where there's a foot chase. But the trouble is that Jackman has hurt like his leg or his ankle. I can't remember which. It doesn't matter. But so you're watching this guy hobble. You're watching the hero of the movie hobble during a foot chase, and this foot chase is like about 10 seconds anyway. So it's all just, you can get the sense that it's trying so hard to muster some kind of excitement, and it keeps holding itself back in like this unintentionally hilarious way. So, yeah. And there's always like really big music happening during these action scenes that just really aren't, like him hobble chasing this person is set to really big, exciting, in quotes, music. And it's really quite funny, and I know it's... And I typically don't care for the whole idea of really laughing at something that's not intentionally funny. Usually it's overkill and people just being obnoxious. But I mean, the movie is kind of funny unintentionally, so... and there's just as far as action scenes go, there's just a lot of random shooting, too. Like, scenes where, like, multiple people in a room and they're just firing guns because action scene is happening. Nobody's gonna hit anything. Maybe a couple of extras might get hit. Or like, random thug number 3 or something might get hit. But like nobody major or anything. At least not till like later when it's a big climax of sorts. But by then, once again, who really gives a fuck? Also, there's something going on with the acting here, despite a obviously extremely talented cast. I've already talked about how unfortunately flat Jackman is through most of it. But then you've got a pretty incomprehensible scene later with Rebecca Ferguson and Tandy Newton talking to each other. And when, like in the very early process of making a movie, they'll have a table read where the actors sit around and just kind of read the script out loud in a room together. Not doing like a whole lot of acting, just kind of getting the words and kind of getting comfortable with them and kind of all together. But that's all they're doing. They're just kind of saying the words in a kind of an unprofessional setting, or a laid-back setting. That's how these lines read in this scene between Rebecca Ferguson and Tandy Newton. It feels like they're just at a table read. And they're saying some pretty crucial information that should be getting to some turning points, but there's just no fucking life in it. There's about as much life in that as there is anything else in this. Which is not much. Like I said, its problem is that like it really wants to be a classic, or like have that really classic feel, and it's just not. You can see, like I said, you can see all the ideas and all the things they wanted to do, but it pulls it off so poorly that I still can't quite imagine what it would look like if they had perfected everything they wanted to. It's just way too jumbled. It's trying to do way too much. And it's obviously it's going to get to that point given the concept where it's like another reason you are continuously losing interest is that whole idea of them establishing you're never quite sure if you're looking at real life or a memory, and that might sound cool, that might sound like, it keeps you guessing, it keeps you on your toes, shit like that. But not really. Like, they don't even use that to their advantage. Even if they did use it to their advantage, it'd be more or less predictable. Like, it'd be pretty predictable things you could do with that. But at least they'd be doing something. but it's like I said, I don't even think they're fully taking advantage of what they have. And that's what I was talking about. Like I can't believe of all the recent movies that Free Guy seems to be one of the only ones interested in actually having a high concept and then trying to open all of its doors. Because like I was saying, like it's such a common complaint from me, but it just keeps happening. Is they have really high concepts and then they don't bother to think of anything else. They get so proud of themselves for having one idea, and then they don't even like write the rest of it. Like they just kind of half-ass it, and they just go down these. Well, here's some stuff other movies did. Like, hey, we did enough of our own thing by coming up with an idea, so now it's time we can just do all the stuff that other movies did because we have one idea, and we can use that as our crutch. We can piggyback on that to get through a whole movie, which is clearly not how it works. So, um, and it's obviously it's not as thought provoking as it is clearly trying to be or was hoping to be. Like if you can call it thought provoking, it's very much on a surface level, and Hugh Jackman's gonna have your thoughts for you anyway through his narration, so you don't even have to do anything. So there's that, and you know what I think another problem is because of the whole Rebecca Ferguson thing, where it's like, oh, our love story went on for months and then she disappeared, and now I have to find her, and the kind of character that Jackman is because of that. The whole thing is just so fucking broody all the time. Like, there's not... And you would think, like, if it's going to bring the action sci-fi element into it or something, there'd be some sort of hint of fun or something, you would think. I mean, I get if it wants to take itself seriously, but I mean, sooner or later, when you have, like, an action sci-fi thing going on with big ideas, eventually your audience is going to have some kind of fun, whether it be with the ideas or the action or what. But it's just, everything's just a dead zone. Like, everything. There's like little turns they try to do, and none of them are surprising or matter. So, yeah, I'm boring myself trying to talk about this movie, so I don't know what else I can really say. As far as, like, relatively recent sci-fi, and I don't know if it's just the titles being similar or what, but I heard like some comparisons to stuff like Transcendence, the Wally Pfister movie with Johnny Depp. The movie that's the reason I don't think we've seen Wally Pfister direct anything else, despite being an Oscar-winning cinematographer, and a very well-known one. But yeah, and stuff like that as well, where you can take these really interesting and cool sci-fi ideas and then just turn them into nothing but boring crap because you don't want to expand on anything. And isn't that the whole point of sci-fi, is to, like, see how far you can take ideas? Why does, like, everybody want to come up with one idea and fucking run away? Or, call in people that are just, like, generic screenwriters that just say, oh, this is the shit we normally do, we'll just put that in there and fill in a script so that you can get your idea out there. So, that's all it is. It feels useless. Like, it just feels so empty. I got really absolutely nothing out of it, so that's really all I can really say about that one. So, yeah. So, let's go on over to Netflix and go to Sweet Girl, this Jason Momoa movie, which is interesting and surprisingly probably expands more on its ideas than Reminiscence does, which is very interesting, being what appears to be a very generic Jason Momoa movie. And don't get the wrong idea when I say that. It is a very generic Jason Momoa movie. But it's got some things up its sleeve. But here's the thing, is I was talking about with Reminiscence how you really shouldn't judge a movie by its opening scene, because that's jumping the gun. Well, I was totally judging Sweet Girl by its opening scene. Because, once again, you kind of get an idea in your head already when you go into a generic action movie. But if you have liked generic action movies in the past, there's a very good chance you will like generic action movies down the road. So it's like whenever you see something, it's just like, oh, here's this action star. He runs around and he shoots people. That could at least be fun, you know. But even so, when this movie faded open and we immediately saw like it was nighttime and there was like a city landscape, I don't know, something about that opening shot by itself just made me say, oh, I feel like this is going to be the bad kind of generic. Like, already. Like I said, I know you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't judge a movie by literally its opening frame. Um, but I just gotta, like, sometimes you can't help that. Sometimes you just get a bad feeling from a movie immediately. Um, well, I will say it's not near as bad as that shot made me believe it might be. Or even as generic as that shot made it be. Like I said, it's got something here, and it's got a couple of things it's trying to do. And while it may not quite reach their possible expectations as far as how they got to those things, there's still this one is trying a little bit. And when it comes to generic action movies, it's nice to see, trying every now and then. And something that I think helps this quite a bit is what Jason Momoa is bringing here, because you might see him and you might think, he's like I'm sure there's going to be like comparisons to Chris Hemsworth where it's like, oh yeah, he's got like those one or two characters that he's known for, but that's probably about all he can do. But like I always defended Chris Hemsworth back in the day, when like the first Thor was first happening, it was like he's got some sort of presence that he can bring, and Jason Momoa's got something also. That's more than just like a sort of actiony kind of thing, or the women love him kind of thing. Also, he's the kind of guy, and I feel like this throughout this movie. Also, I feel like Jason Momoa is the kind of guy that can really be like really work as like the action leading guy, like the guy that's front and center. And he'd also be really great, and has been great with like supporting roles, like really meaty supporting roles. Which is why I'm particularly excited to see him in Dune and stuff like that. Even when he was like the villain in Stallone's movie Bullet to the Head, I think was the first time I really like noticed him. And it's like just I don't know. There's something about him that he carries really well that makes him feel less generic than he might seem. And one of the ways he really proves that here is this movie has, for the kind of movie that it is, um, a surprising amount of dramatic beats. Because it starts with his wife dying, which, yeah, insert, tragic backstory. But the inserted tragic backstory is the plot, and like what really sets it off even more. Um, but I mean, we do have to get past the whole thing where we start at the very opening shot is the climax, where he's been like cornered and he's on like a ledge, and then it's like, oh, how did he get here? And then we cut back. This movie's time jumps are comical, in their ridiculousness. But going back to the tragic backstory, the reason his wife dying is so crucial is because, like I said, that's literally the plot, where she is promised a drug that might save her life, and then the greedy pharmaceutical company that was going to distribute that drug decides not to. And so they were under the impression that her life might be saved, and then in one instant are told, oh no, nothing's changed and she's about to die. Like, she will be dead probably within days. Sorry about your lack of miracle cure, but pharmaceutical companies are greedy. And that's why she's going to die. So he has this really great scene. He has a couple of really great scenes here right at the beginning. One is one where he's really exercising his what he has dramatically when he's like, and it's a scene that surprised me in a movie like this, like being in a movie like this, where once she dies or she's like right on the cusp of death, he just like storms out into the hallways and he just like walks blindly, like walks aimlessly through the hallways, like he has no idea what to do with himself before he just kind of breaks down. And it was so shockingly real. Like it felt really real and like real pain. And it's like with Momoa like being a family man in real life, you get the sense that like in his mind he probably took himself to like a really real place there, and just right away that was really impressive. And it's like, okay, so maybe he's gonna bring a little more to this, and he does, like I said, because the whole base of the movie is that essentially, like this scene and these moments in the hospital here. And then there's a second great scene right after that where we see the CEO of this greedy pharmaceutical company, who is Justin Bartha from the Hangover movies. And he's obviously got that very sort of I don't give a fuck slimy thing going on where he's like, I'll give you your fake condolences, but I'm making my money, so fuck you. Uh, and he's on like a news show, so Momoa calls in and basically threatens his life and tells him. So he has his Liam Neeson moment. It's like, hey, I'm gonna find you and I'm gonna kill you for this. And then he immediately becomes like semi-famous for that. And then it very quickly it hits the news like, by the way, this guy that's the hero of the story, he's super fucking dangerous apparently. So he's trying to do this whole thing while also being tracked down himself, because he's made it very aware that he will fuck people up for this. So the setup is very promising and very interesting, and like I said, kind of taking us in slightly different directions than you kind of expect here than just your typical like, Taken thing and stuff like that. I didn't want that to sound like I was bashing Taken or anything, but it's like to kind of just show that it has more up its sleeve. But the problem is that it having a lot up its sleeve is probably also its downfall, because after a while it's like it tries to surprise you more than once, and after a while it seems like it gets a little too focused on trying to be surprising and show that it has more up its sleeve, and it gets a little carried away, and it's like then you start to desire like a more Taken thing where it's like a much more simplified thing, and it starts to overcomplicate itself in a way that's really not necessary. um, and it's like you got to kind of find the sweet spot there where you're not doing too much but you're not doing too little. And there are movies that can find this spot, but apparently it's hard to reach. And this movie finds it for a little bit, but then, like I said, as it goes on, it kind of loses that nice balance that it had between being the revenge action movie and being the movie with a lot of emotion in its center, the emotion that's really driving it. Um, and it's and another thing too is, especially with like talking about him having his dramatic abilities, also the whole idea of the fact that he's playing like this really bloodthirsty revenge seeking dude, but the fact that he's very much dad like to his daughter even throughout this, and the fact that she's kind of following along whether he likes it or not. And it's yeah, it almost could have had like I could see a darker version of this coming off a lot like Running Scared, the Paul Walker movie, the amazing Paul Walker movie. It could have maybe done something a little like that if it wanted to go a little darker and have a bit more teeth, but it's like I said, it's more interested in being like surprising or whatever, and I don't. And it's like I said, it gets too bogged down with that, and it really loses. And because of that, because it gets so focused on trying to be surprising, it starts to kind of lose that thing it had going with like the strong character work that it had going, like the not just him by himself, but the father daughter thing was working pretty well in those early scenes as well, and it, many times throughout. But yeah, and the action itself also leaves a lot to be desired. Like it's not entirely incompetent, but it does look like it looks like a Netflix movie. It has this sort of kind of cheap, cutty quality to it. But there are significantly worse action things out there. Like it's fine. It's not too obnoxious or anything, which is a compliment when it comes to movies like this quite a bit. Yeah, so I can see what it was trying to do. Like I said, it kind of keeps falling short, of these big places that it's trying to go. Like I said, if it had just kept itself simpler and tried not to do so much like showing all their hands and stuff like that. It might have been something a bit more, certainly a bit more interesting, especially the whole idea of how like real the whole conflict is of greedy pharmaceutical companies being the villain of a movie like this is a really cool idea. But like I said, it almost feels like they kind of stop exploring that just for the sake of these much more generic things that are going on. Um, and then when they try to be a bit too much more than they are, so yeah, so it's I would say it's just like kind of right in the middle where it almost gets to some places it's trying to get, but never quite, unfortunately. But it's very very appreciated that they would try. So, and I don't want that to sound condescending or anything. Like seriously, when when a movie tries is really nice. So it's got that. Um, so let's go on to let's finish this one on Coda. Uh, One of the more acclaimed movies of the year as of now. Um, and CODA is an acronym for Child of Deaf Adults. So we have this. The writer and director is Sean Hader. It looks like it looks like Heater, but apparently it's pronounced like Bill Hader. Um, and she has adapted this French movie. But apparently, the big difference here from this and the French movie is I think the French movie only had one actual deaf actor in it, and obviously here all three of the deaf family members are played by deaf actors. With obviously Marley Matlin returning to the awards race after she won for 1986 for Children of a Lesser God. It's about time she finally came back around because it's like you know she has the abilities of an Oscar-winning actress, but it's like after a while she went like into thrillers and then like TV stuff and like there was that documentary. And it's like you just kind of been waiting for her to come back and remind you that she's the Oscar-winning actress, and it looks like this is a start to that. Um, and you have the dad who is Troy Kotzer, who is amazing, and the brother who is Daniel Durant, and with them being the deaf family members, obviously we have one hearing child who is the title character, and she is played by Amelia Jones, who I've seen not only getting acclaim but getting comparisons to like when Saoirse Ronan was just starting out and stuff like that, making that big of an impression. And I can see where a lot of this acclaim comes from, and I imagine one of the first things that some people might think when they see the acclaim for this movie is the idea of is it just acclaimed because it's almost being used like a novelty, that it's deaf actors playing this deaf family, and I don't I wouldn't call it a novelty or anything, um, because there is like because I'm not one of those people that's against actors playing people with disabilities or anything, but it's like when while I wouldn't be against hearing actors playing these parts, I definitely think there's an authenticity that's here that otherwise probably wouldn't be. That's like a through line throughout it. It makes all the interactions especially feel really real. Like when you look at the conversations, especially between Marley Matlin and Troy Kotzer, it's like the way they have this, like just the way that they sign, it's almost like you can see vocal inflections even though they're not using their voices. Like you can see them like hit exasperated notes, and it feels. So, I'm not obviously I'm not doing anything. I'm just throwing my arms around, but to give you the idea, I'm just talking with my arms. But the thing here also is how you can see like all the emotions to the point that you can basically you might as well be able to hear their voices, by how clearly these performances come through. Um, and obviously those are going to be the strongest aspects, but there's a lot of stuff going on here because it's also a coming of age movie, which is also, part of the appeal. Because you have the coming of age story where you have all the normal stuff that comes with coming of age movies, but as far as her being the only hearing person in her family, there's this added conflict of her being a very crucial part of their lives because she's also their translator, whether it be at work or at the doctor or wherever. And so there's that attachment that it's because usually you get a storyline in a movie where it's like, oh, they don't want their child to grow up and move on without them because it's like almost like a selfish thing, like they couldn't deal with that. But here it's a case where it's like they like need her to keep working, and all these other really important things that come up, and conflicts that find their way into it later, are all reasons that she kind of almost has to do this, unless they think way ahead and find another way to do this. She's basically stuck here, despite the fact that she has really big aspirations. Mainly, as it turns out, is singing, interestingly enough. And this is where it might get, like, really familiar. Where we've got, first off, we've got her little crush. So in any coming-of-age movie, that's inevitably going to be here, regardless of how underdeveloped it absolutely is. But the thing that kind of takes center stage here for a while, no pun intended, is her going to this singing class and getting roped into this competition of sorts. Is that what it is? It's some sort of recital or something. I know I've got all the details down. Forgive me. But I see a lot of goddamn movies. But as she's in this class, we meet her teacher, who is Eugenio Derbez. And the interesting thing about him is, I was talking about the authenticity that comes with this movie. And it's like it's authentic all the way down to, if I remember correctly, the scenes where they're fishing, which is what like their business is and what they do for a living. Like they were actually really fishing in those scenes, and there's a plot that kind of ended up the plot in the movie kind of ended up bleeding into real life, when it came to doing that, as far as like actually, on the set when they were filming. But despite that authenticity, when we're coming over to this coming of age story, which is much more movie like, when she's not with her family, we have this teacher character that we might all recognize from other movies. The inspirational teacher who's kind of harsh at first, but he's also really funny, but he's also really serious. And it's like you really, really want to win his approval, and you really, really don't want to disappoint him, and you're kind of carrying on the legacy that he couldn't quite fill himself. Stuff like that. And it's obviously a really, really big cliche. And also the fact that, talking about the authenticity, is if you know Derbez is an actor, you know that he is very over the top and can be like really almost cartoonish a lot of the time. And that's still here in this performance as well. But what's really funny about that and really interesting is I actually didn't mind that, and I almost could still feel the authenticity, because even if he's a bit cartoonish, and even if we've seen him sort of like this in other roles, and this is a cliche character, he was still really reminding me of teachers that I've had. So, so I was kind of feeling him throughout this movie. So I don't really think that took too much away from the authenticity, even if it feels like he's maybe a bit more over the top than the rest of it. That whole thing was kind of working for me anyway. So, and I was kind of digging his performance. So, I'm good with that. So, and that's the thing also, is that's basically what this whole movie's thing is, where it's like you're either gonna, because there's movies like this, like, it's kind of have this inspirational feel where it's like obviously they're cliche. The question is if you're gonna run with it or not, like if the cliches win you over or not, because obviously being cliche isn't always a bad thing. It really comes down to the execution and the characters themselves. Like I said, not all the characters work. Like the boyfriend, in particular. Like I said, not only is he underdeveloped, but a lot of the conflicts are really forced. Like there's a moment here where something happens while the boyfriend is at the house, and it's a very funny moment, for the movie and for most of the characters. But the thing is while this could be something that the kid, and I get her being embarrassed easily because she's a teenage girl and she's got a lot on her shoulders, and like it's she looks like she's just on the verge of collapsing from exhaustion at any minute, and we feel that throughout. That's something that Jones really brings to it really well, is that feeling of seeing her look like she has the weight of the world on her shoulders because of all these responsibilities that she has, while she's trying to do her own thing also and find herself. Even though she's like glued to the family for obvious reasons, important reasons. But when this thing happens, this thing that is funny, and most of the characters are laughing about it. And I feel like it would have been a much more charming scene if just everybody eventually laughed about it. But it's like this. There's like one stepping stone, and then it's a full-on conflict for a while, for like half the movie. So that's a drag when you can see just how obvious the conflicts are and how obviously they could be resolved if people just stopped pouting. But but that's just kind of one plot thread when there's a few going on here, and they're all balanced really well. Like I said, especially with the way you can see her progressively wearing down, trying to do all these things at once, because they all have. Because some movies are just trying to, do one thing and then another thing and then another thing, but like it's all connected to her and her well-being and how she's handling all this stuff at once, as the lead character that has responsibilities attached to all of these things, including her future. Like it's literally her future is just right there, but she's like down this path because she has to. And to see that journey of her potentially coming over here and going down her own path, is what we really want to see. Like I said, regardless of the cliches that may get us there. And it does have, if there's one place where it might feel like it might be trying to do too much, it's that we basically get two different climaxes. And they're both the same. Like, it's not like, here's one big task and here's the other big task. It's kind of down the same road. It's like, this could have been a climax for this storyline, but this same storyline has another climax, basically. And I get it from a story perspective. Like, they set it up, at least. But it still feels a bit... Like, it feels like they have the same payoff is the problem, I think. But it's still, undeniably touching, basically. And like I said, there's one... This is something they could have really milked, but there's one scene where the sound goes out, and we kind of get it from the perspective of the parents, the family. And that's really nice also. Like I said, I think the fact that they didn't like milk that kind of idea helped a lot. It's not as creative as what we saw in like Sound of Metal, but it's a good emotional moment. That's really nice. And yeah, as you can probably guess, and I was talking about this in the awards video we just did. This is absolutely a crowd pleaser. Like it's kind of unfortunate this is the era that it came out in, because audiences, especially like together, I could see like really loving this thing. Like there is a parallel, way down life where this is like a massive hit. Yeah, but I'm assuming people will come across, especially if it ends up being an award success, which right now I have it being a mild one, but it could be a lot more than that. Like I said, with Marlee Matlin coming back and really showing off what she can do and showing off that she won an Oscar for a reason, is really great. So yeah, so I'm not like in love with this. Like I do think it's a bit bogged down by, some of those cliches that it can't quite, rise completely above, and some obvious beats and some forced conflict. But I do think it's very, very good, and the cast is incredible, so it does have that. So I think that's going to be it for these three. So the next three are going to be The Night House, The Protege, and Respect. So, and then we'll go into September where there's going to be a whole bunch of shit. So until that, I think that's it.